Hello, Michael Williams here, and here's my video for the final sprint. As you can see, I have attactor mode in place. Currently, there is no sound. The ship moves in a figure-8 pattern automatically. The Centipede does collide with the high score text and the other text on the screen from the HUD. As you can see, there is a repair stage. The wave does repeat itself, and this will loop indefinitely until the player interacts with it. If the player beats all the Centipede, then the wave starts again. If the player dies, the wave starts again. It's all based off of whatever the first wave is in the wave text file. I hit 1, and then it becomes one player mode. As you can see, the spider, depending on what range you kill it at, it will give you various points. The flea drops mushrooms on a random basis. The player cannot go to the bottom level of the zone, like in the Atari version. When the player dies, the mushrooms all respawn. They go through, they play their sound, and they give the player points. The player's lives in the upper left-hand corner. Currently, I have 2 lives left. The flea will now keep spawning because there's less than the limit of mushrooms, which is 6 in my zone. Now that there's a certain level of mushrooms, I think it's actually 10. If I check the text file, it is 10, so it's 6 later on. If I can defeat the Centipede, the second wave starts. This wave is based off the text file. There's also the scorpion spawning, and there's 2 heads. As you can see, my high score updated because I reached past the 5,000 point, and then it adjusted all the high score lists accordingly. I do not have implemented the input your initials, so there's just placeholder initials there. I hit the 2 button, so this is now 2-player mode. You can tell by the fact that there is the 2-player HUD. Okay, there's wave 1 for player 1. Scorpion now spawns. Player dies. Player 2 starts. There's a brief pause. As you can see, I'm not very good at this while playing the game and talking at the same time. As you can see, there are 2 different mushroom wave fields. There you can see the Centipede was doing the enraged mode. The wave switches back to the the field switches back to the player 2 field. Back to the player 1 field. As you can also see, the wave each player is on is different. Heads do spawn from the left and right on a timer once any Centipede part reaches the bottom. If I can get through this, that'd be awesome. Or not. Player 1 is out of lives. So after player 2 dies, it will be the end of 2-player mode. Player 1 has the high score for the whole game, so his score was updating the high score area. And as you can see in the high score in the middle, it has been updated with the high score that I reached. 1-player 1 and 2-player mode. I'm back in attractor mode. And that is a demo of the game as it is now in its final version. Here I'm going to go over the various code that makes the ship work properly in Centipede. In the initialization of the ship, it sets up the ship's lives, sets up a manager, which is a singleton class that I created that contains basically all the other managers, so for easier callability and organization. The input in order to control, which controls the input from the keyboard to affect the ship, and the bullet factory that keeps track of the bullet and recycles it as such. Here's the various stuff that sets up the main sprite, the zone of the ship, like the area it can move in. I only create one ship ever, and I never delete it, and I reuse it. So there is a reset for the ship that's called by the game controller, which controls all the movements of the game and its progression, and manages all that, which is a separate controller I'll go over later. Here's the manager. Manager contains the game controller, which then calls inside the game controller what happens when the player dies and sets that all into motion on its destroy. For the update, either the ship is active or inactive. When it's inactive, the attractor, which controls the AI mode, takes over, which is and when the attractor is not active, then the ship takes over. The input class controls the inputs. Whenever a key is pressed, it changes the impulse of the ship at that moment, which then calls the move of the ship. If I can find it, here it is. The move of the ship to do all the proper movements and stuff like that. Therefore, this is only called if there's ever an input. And these have to be checked anyway all the time, as I don't know of another way to do it. And then the keyboard fire does the same thing, but with the keyboard, with the return key. And it causes the ship's fire, which does the check with the bullet factory if it can actually spawn an extra bullet if there's one in reserve, and there'll only be one in reserve if there's not one active, so it keeps track of the bullets to a one-to-one basis. Here's all the collisions, which are basically all destroys. Here's a clear bullet thing, because when you're switching from attractor to the game mode or switching between game modes, you don't want to have a bullet straight on the field, because that causes weird issues and it shouldn't happen anyway. Bullet factory basically just has 2 pointers that keep track of the reserve bullet and active bullet, and it switches the bullet between the two accordingly with the spawn bullet and recycle bullet functions. Attractor is a pretty basic class that I constructed to create a basic AI, which takes over the ship and calls the ship's move and fire based on basically automatic timers to create this AI effect. The attractor, since it's active during attract mode, controls you hit 1 or 2, it sets the proper mode in the game control. What I do is I set up a bunch of vectors for, like, I just named them like up left, up right, down left, down right, and it calls them accordingly in a loop that I set up. It's not pretty, but it makes sense to me, and it's kind of, you can easily just step through it and to create the figure 8 pattern. It's all alarm based, and that is the ship, bullet, and a tractor for my Centipede. Now I'll be going over the mushroom and its implementation into my Centipede game. Here's the basic mushroom class. The normal constructor is never called, but it always has a position, and it also has a callback to the mushroom factory in which it spawns. Here you can see all the various things that are set up for it that are just for the sprites, etc., positioning. The update doesn't really have much because all it needs to ever do is set the position and then update it. When the mushroom dies, if it's in the player zone, there was a player zone count that's being tracked for mushrooms in player zone in order to spawn the flea accordingly. Also, there's a list that tracks how many mushrooms are damaged, so that I can do the repair at the end and then remove those damaged mushrooms from the repair list once the repair is over. And there's also various fields that the mushroom can be in. They can be either player 1 field or the player 2 field. This is tracked inside the mushroom factory, which has 2 linked lists of pointers of mushrooms. Mushroom has various collisions with the spider, just gets destroyed. The bullet, which the poison state is checked just to ensure that it is set to the right part of the sprite. Sets position. Player zone check is called when it's created in order to increment the proper number for that. Add to field, it checks against the game controller's active player. The game controller keeps track of all that. Depending on which is the active player, when the field's made, it will be pushed back to said field. The repair. This repair is called during the repair cycle process, and every mushroom on a list will then is on a list. It gets called. The list goes through. It calls the first mushroom. It says repair. It doesn't loop through. It just does that, and then this mushroom is responsible for repairing itself, setting its own alarm 0, which after it's over in the repair speed, which in this case is 0.1, which is set in my constants file, it will then call back to the begin repair function. The begin repair function will keep doing this. If I can find it, it will do this until the damage list is a size of 0, and therefore empty. When it repairs, it removes itself from the list. Therefore, this list finishes itself once there are no more mushrooms to repair, in which case it calls repair complete, the game controller, and it continues the game as such. Because there's 2 fields, there's an activate and deactivate on the mushrooms. I do not move the mushrooms, I simply deregister their collision and then make them invisible so that they are unaffected in the game. And then I have in the mushroom factory a deactivate 1, reactivate 1, which does it for the player 1 field, and then deactivate 2, reactivate 2 for the player 2 field. Even though it's a little repetitive, it helps keep things clearer to me when I'm later on in the game controller and I'm trying to make sure everything's lining up just right. Okay, that's it for the mushroom. The mushroom factory has an active and a reserve list. It just keeps track of everything it needs to do to recycle the mushrooms properly and use them properly. The mushroom field class doesn't actually, its real purpose is only to create a field of mushrooms, and after that it doesn't really keep track of them. I put all the tracking back into the mushroom factory because it just made the most sense, considering it already was basically tracking all the lists of the mushroom, so might as well track the player fields too. I was going to put it here, but it really didn't have that kind of functionality inside of it, so it didn't make much sense to me.